All right, I'll tell it later. Okay. Welcome everyone for this another round of conversation with leaders, wherein we are touching base on important conversations as we look at different industries, different functions, different areas of our society through the gender lens. And with Ungender, that has been the primary motto. That is how we want to look at the world, to understand why things happen in a certain way, why certain genders are missing from certain fields, why do we see a higher ratio of gender in some positions, in some industries, in some functions, and why exactly? The answer is why. And once we understand the why, then we'll be able to understand how do we actually go about addressing those gaps. In today's conversation, we have Mansi Verma here, who is handling investment portfolios for VenturEast. Thank you so much, Mansi, for joining us. This is such an important discussion that I can't even begin to tell you. I myself have been part of the startup ecosystem for almost, I think, more than a decade now. And this is something which is just there at the back of the mind. But through Ungender, I actually get to have these conversations and directly invite leaders, individuals like you, and think through this problem area, this particular aspect of looking at specific industries and today the VC ecosystem and the startup ecosystem from the gender lens. I once again welcome you on this particular talk.
Thank you, Pallavi. It's a pleasure to be here and to have this chat. Thank you for inviting me.
No, thank you for taking out time. For us, what has been very concerning at the same time, also a conversation from our side of the world, wherein we are constantly looking at different industries and functions, and we keep looking at it from the gender lens. Wherever you actually see that the specific balance is not there, and we don't even know what that balance is, right? Because if we go the industry benchmarks globally, if you achieve 20-25% women to men ratio, and for the sake of maybe today's conversation, we will only stick to binary gender and will not be able to go beyond binary on this one. But wherever we look at women and men ratio, we somehow seem to be okay with anything between 20-25%. So I don't even know what that balance should be. And these are few of the questions that we actually keep thinking about, that who is deciding it, and on what basis are we actually concluding these numbers? Are they even good enough or not? So definitely to have someone like you who has been part of this ecosystem for more than 10 years now, it's extremely crucial that you share your observations, your insights, and your experiences here. So I'll start with my first question here. Mansi is diving straight into it. I'm sure that since you have been part of this ecosystem in a very active manner, uh, you must also be becoming privy to these topics. I don't know when they would have started for you, but it will be very interesting to know, when did you start observing that yes, the gender balance or the gender ratio in the startup ecosystem as well as the VC firms is something that started becoming visible to you also. When did it happen?
So a very pertinent question, and it's something that is always there, alongside where we work, where we exist. But to actually, by the time it hits you is maybe when you, take up any kind of educational courses or when you start working yourself. For me, I think that realization happened that, there is an issue with the gender representation of women in India. It happened when I was in my final year of MBA. This was year 2009, 2010. And there was a lot of conversation happening around that, certain multinational firms are looking to shortlist women candidates. And where are the women candidates in MBA? They had a hiring mandate of 50% of the hiring had to be women.
Oh, that's
And
nice.
yeah, that was their mandate back in 2008-9. But in stark contrast was our batch, the graduating batch. We were 330 students, out of which there were only 30 women.
Oh,
So at
wow.
the 10% gender ratio, The recruiter's task was very hard. I actually sympathize with the recruiter at that point, making their life very difficult because you can never achieve a 50% hiring ratio, even though your firm mandates you, even though you recognize that needs to improve. And I think why that ratio is so important for us to consider, especially in the context of India. When you look at it in India, we have 50% of the population as women, right?
Mhm.
Whereas only 34% of women are there in workforce. That number by itself looks better than the number that you mentioned, 20-25%. But that's number at the overall level, when you look at unskilled, when you look at semi-skilled, and you look at the professional levels. But when you start looking at, the women who have made it to middle or senior levels, that's only a fraction, right? Especially in the Indian startup ecosystem, the numbers tend to be even more skewed. When you look at the number of companies which have received venture funding that are women-led or women-founded, that number is only 17%, right? And the number that have only female founders, no male founders on the founding team,
Hmm.
it's only a mere 6%, right? And is that number something that we should be comfortable with? And why is that number, the way it is? So these numbers in itself tells a very interesting story, and anybody who's, very attuned to numbers and who enjoys statistics
Yeah.
actually starts to question these numbers. Why is it the way it is? Is this right? Is this wrong? You know, but I feel, and I've pondered over this a lot, and I feel it's not the representation of women which is the problem. It is
Hmm.
the symptom of an underlying problem, right? And that is why we need to talk about it to understand the issues which have led to this representation being the way it is, right? When I've evaluated my friends who are both men and women, and I
Mhm.
look at the conditions in front of them, the kind of circumstances that they have to deal with. Obviously, the conditions for a woman entrepreneur are definitely much more challenging. They are more difficult, not because of capability issues. You and I have gone to schools where you've co-ed schools and co-ed colleges, so conditions are absolutely same. I mean, nobody stops you from achieving your potential. Everybody encourages you to do that. But
Right.
it's when you step out of an academic institution, you step out of a corporate life, it's the cultural and the social biases against women, which
Mhm.
still exist, no matter how much we are, we become more westernized, we become more modern, and no matter how much there is acceptance of women in the workplace, at some level that acceptance dwindles. And that acceptance, I think, dwindles even more when you look at tech based roles. It's not very easy for people to reconcile women being in a tech led role. Women are always seen as caregivers, right? They're always seen as somebody who would rush to the rescue. So that
Yeah.
kind of a mindset is not prevalent, today. We are getting there. The good thing is we are getting there. And like I mentioned that, it starts at the college level, where, for me, it started, like I mentioned, you were 10%. Though it was post-grad, we were obviously, the representation of women was very bad at that point in time.
Hmm.
And this continues. Obviously, it has to translate into representation at the corporate level. It has to, right?
True.
You suddenly can't enhance that. So that is to me a bigger problem about the cultural biases that exist, and they exist in the mind of both men and women. I would
Hmm.
not say it's the cultural biases which are being percolated by men. I definitely don't feel so. I think it's both genders. It's young and old people who are responsible for the kind of experiences they have, for the kind of, the kind of exposure they've had. So we can't really fault it, but we need to then decide, okay, what do we need to do to change this? How do we change the cultural biases against women in business? How do we increase access to finance, right? And the ability for them to seek funding, to really break this nexus which exists today.
No, I'm sorry to interrupt you here, Mansi. Just one question that I want to ask before we actually go into all these hows, right? So in the past, say 6-7 months, another thing that we have been doing is we have been observing all these webinars and conferences and events and talk shows and everything that is happening. And irrespective of whichever industry it is, until and
Hmm.
unless the title of that session specifically has the word woman, that means we will be discussing specifically maybe healthcare for women, or infrastructure for women, or safety for
Yeah.
women, or cyber
Hmm.
security for women. Until and unless something is being dedicatedly discussed for women, and that will also only happen if women are the ones who are organizing it, right? That okay, we need to
Perhaps.
look at it
Yes.
from that manner. Yes, perhaps, right. So that's also the majority here. We see
Right.
that maybe the leaders who exist, or representation is happening from a single gender, which is cis male aspect here, purely from the visible sense. And we started raising a lot of concern around that also, that where are the women? Why don't we have diverse panels out there? We are sure in healthcare there must be many women leaders who must be out there. In startup ecosystem, there must be many. There must be many women entrepreneurs in different areas who must be working. The
Hmm.
one question that started getting asked by us again is, why is it important? And that's the same question that I'm bringing here to everything that you said so far, that it should bother us. It should be something that should be looked into. This is something that we should address. Now, this why should we even bother about whether there are enough women in the startup ecosystem or not? Why should we even bother about whether there are enough women founders who are out there? Right, at a global level, yes, I think there's around 12 trillion dollars will be added to the GDP overall if we actually look at more contribution from women. But I think from if we
Hmm.
just tone it down to India specific, because we can't leave it to the intelligence of each and
Hmm.
every individual out there, that okay, just calculate it for yourself that how much you will benefit, right? So why
Right.
having gender balanced representation is important, especially when we talk about startup as well as VC ecosystem.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, so that's very, when we debate these numbers, it's very pertinent to know why we're debating it. Why do we really need to bring that gender representation up? So, my take on that is, when we talk of India, right, we talk of India in terms of demographic dividend, right? When I heard demographic dividend, I said, what is this? And I quickly Googled it up. This was almost 15 years back. And I said, okay, what is this demographic? I know dividend, I know demographics. But when you bring the two of them together, right, it means completely different thing. It does have nothing to do with dividends, and it has completely different connotations from demographic.
Hmm.
So that means basically what is your potential for producing the kind of GDP given the kind of population you have, right?
Mhm.
The representation of the underrepresentation of women into workforce means that that part of GDP is not actually acknowledged. It's not the formal part of GDP, right? A woman as a caregiver at home is not paid anything. Her hours of working, her capability, her cooking skills, her gardening skills are not being valued as such. So hence there is definitely underrepresentation, right?
Hmm.
So every woman is an economic asset, right? When we think of economic assets, we think of hard assets, we think of male as the bread earner of the family. And it's the men out there who are actually in the workforce who are creating GDP. So why not have more and more women also join in the workforce and create GDP? You know, so the idea of recognizing a woman as an economic asset and learning how including them in our lives and how it affects the nature of our businesses, right? How it affects how marketing firms think about, oh, there is a woman at the decision making part, right? She is a economically independent woman, and hence I need to cater my marketing communication to tap into the way businesses are structured. It changes the way businesses think about their products and services, right, and delivery.
Right.
So it started out in the West, and now it's also catching up in India, right? Because including women as part of the product construct creates better companies. Including women as part of the solution for those products and services creates better businesses, right? And all of this is a self fulfilling cycle, as you can say.
So that is true, and thank you for bringing this. I think I'm also going to Google and read more about it. This economic dividend, this phrase, very, very, very crucial to understand what exactly is the missing part. Because otherwise, we can all talk in an umbrella manner that yes, more women working, more income in families, and
Yeah,
more resources available for you, more options, basically better bargaining power, and so many other things. But yes, it's
yes.
important to understand how each and every individual is actually a resource out there, and that's how they should be looked at. If I bring the same concept to the VCs, and in startup
Hmm.
ecosystem, we divide it in two worlds. There are founders, and there are people who are willing to support those founders. And
Right.
I'm forgetting the name of the book, which was written, I think, 2 years ago, which had a set pattern. It had studied the number of startups which were funded in the past 10 years or so, and it had a
Hmm.
set pattern that mostly are male. Okay, which is not a surprise. That's okay, we can keep it on the side. Second is they come from a standard combination of being coming from IIT, IIMs, or some Ivy League schools, and then maybe would have worked and I myself am a Marwadi, so that person is a Marwadi also being good with money. There is a set
Hmm.
course of ingredient that is being considered as a success criteria, that it has worked in the
Hmm.
past. So it is something which is a at least a higher possibility that this will also succeed. And I'm putting it
Yeah.
as politely and diplomatically as I can, but this is a form of bias, is it not? And I'm asking you because you sit on the other side of the table, right, Mansi? And then
Hmm.
I'm sure
Yeah.
that there are some preconceived notions, some considerations, because what are judgments at the end of the day? These are our past experiences that we are collecting in our head, and we are saying that okay, this is something that works and this is something that doesn't work. So the do's and the don'ts, some
Hmm.
checklist. How
Yeah.
do these biases, especially when it comes to gender and the associated norms, how much do they impact when we talk about this whole sitting across the table and analyzing a particular founder on the basis of whether it's a worthy investment or not? How much role does gender actually play?
Yeah. So you're right. See, so we as humans are ingrained in trying to find associations, which we call biases, and these associations are formed on the basis of experience, right? When you look at, a lot of research has been done, and there is enough and more written in terms of so that in lay terms, so that you and I can understand that research. So it says
Right.
that people develop experiences, and some happen to be good, some happen to be bad, and that's how your biases or judgments are formed, right?
Mm.
From the very get-go, you think of Ivy Leagues, right, as something which they would have a higher IQ, and it's established. It's a given. There are no two ways about that. Whereas when you think of something which is not an Ivy League, there is obviously a filtering and some kind of uh, uh, a system which associates, which filters people in a certain on a capability and a potential level, right? And even if you don't have capability, you still make it. The system is so well rounded. It's your peer group, it's the kind of support system that
Yeah.
in a way you get a better experience and you come out at the better end of the table, right? So one, it's the ability to make it into this, and for people to acknowledge that yes, if they ask you basically what's your lineage, they can then have a more meaningful association. For example, people ask which city you're from, which country you're from,
Yeah.
which car do you drive. I think those are conversation starters. um, and those also help you to a large extent. The reason they come up in conversations, especially when we talk about investing, is not to look in terms of creating biases, but then to understand if there are common network connects that you can tap into to understand where they are coming from, the mindset, the kind of challenges they've had, to understand that better, and then to able to connect to them at a personal level. I don't think, at least in the conversations that I've had with the entrepreneurs, that gender bias really comes up front. But yes, we've seen that there are certain businesses that are more attuned to being founded by women, especially where the products are made for women. And you can only understand that because as a woman, you know that the feel for that product and the challenges and the core need for that can only be felt by a certain segment of people. And that is why you see a lot of women who've done well in biotechnology, right? You've seen a lot of women who've done better in consumer products, right? And there are CEOs of consumer products who are women. And now, because technology is enabling a lot of products that women use on a regular basis, I think more women use Amazon and Flipkart than men actually use it, right? So,
That
hence, because you have women who use this more, women can feel the need for product improvement, for services improvement, for marketing, right? So there is a need to appreciate that gender, and to understand that we as investors also need to look for gender diversity, if not in the founding team, then at least in the senior leadership team, right?
right.
Because wherever I've looked, you have more very successful companies actually are known to have very diverse leadership teams, right?
True.
Gender diversity is known. I mean, there's been established studies, whether you look at listed companies, unlisted companies, you go back 50 years in history.
Yeah.
It is known that gender diverse companies are relatively more productive, and they have lower volatility in terms of investor returns as well. And that is why it becomes important. And when we talk about gender, I just want to clarify that it's not that we are saying that gender means woman. It doesn't.
Yeah.
Gender means that it should be equal representation. There should be a gender equality, you know. And only that leads to better outcomes. Even fully women centric businesses will still be stymied by lack of the other gender's point of view. So balance is what we are looking for when we talk about that is gender representation ideal in a company, right?
No, thank you for stating that part that when we talk about gender, it doesn't really mean that, only one gender is important and just have more
Right.
women, all women. But anywhere there's no, I think wherever there's that balance is missing, that means there's a single perspective ruling or the single line of thinking which is looking at it. Although I have spoken to a lot of women groups, which because of the experiences, are able to empathize even for the other gender, but I don't think that's possible. I think it's much better that each there has to be representation from each side instead of somebody thinking on the other person's behalf. And
Right.
that's the equality or that's the equity, if I'm not mistaken, is what you're referring to. That
Right. Right.
all genders are important at the end of the day. But
Yes.
going back to that whole lineage part that you were talking about, Mansi, see, both you and have been part of the same society. I mean,
Right.
I don't know if you. I'm sure both in our lives also we would have spent some time going abroad, seeing how the world is outside India. But we understand how the system is here, right? To expect that the same number of women will be able to reach the same other side of the table that you will have if you have 100 applicants, there will be 50
Hmm.
women and 50 men who will send in their applications, means that they have all gone through the same journey, which
Hmm.
considering the way that our society is not really the case. To be able to even continue your education beyond primary or secondary, or to be able to choose these hardcore subjects, science, maths, is something that is not really an option for majority of the women out there. Sometimes it is not,
Hmm.
it is enforced, and sometimes just because that is how society has conditioned you, that you as an individual yourself will think that maths is not for me, science is not for me, technology is not for me, maybe arts is for me, or something creative, you know
Yes.
that's how we are, that's how I have experienced society, that's how I have seen a lot of women experiencing this society also. So it's
Hmm.
very difficult or almost impossible that maybe in the next 1 2 or even 5 years, we will see that the same number of women or gender ratio will exist in the 12th class students, and then them applying for cats for them to be able to get into the IITs and the IIMs of this country. If
Hmm.
that is the pipeline that we are talking about, and that cannot be fixed overnight, and I don't think this is
Hmm.
the job of VC ecosystem to fix it also, because that's not the industry that you're part of. right? That's some in the whole ecosystem of this country. That's the job that is for somebody else. Families play a very important role. Colleges, teachers, mentors play a very important role. But if you have this pipeline which is coming your way, then what is the solution? One of the things that keep coming up is if we have more women in VC's decision making team, then maybe
Hmm.
there is more hope for women founders out there. Have you heard
Hmm.
a similar argument, and what's your take on this one?
Yeah. So stepping back a little, when we talk about the representation of women in VC firms, it's true that representation today is abysmally low. Only 16% of leadership roles in VCs are being held by women. And
Right.
when you look at partnership level, that dwindles down further to single digit, 5-7%, right? And I'm looking at the top 100 VCs in the country. So there is definitely an issue today, and early in their career, right? People typically make a choice on the kind of the choice of career in their life in their early 20s, right? And not enough young women have been choosing finance, right? Maybe because they don't have that support system to tell them what those challenges are going to be and what the rewards are going to be, right? So it's both a pipeline and a progression issue, which requires attention. Young women who do choose to take up finance in their life, right? They need constant mentoring and support to be able to understand how to make a lasting career out of finance. It's not very organically done because you don't have many women role models.
True.
It's increasing, but you don't have as many men role models, right? So somehow the perception in our mind, like you said, math is not for me. It's a perception, and you don't change that unless you see people who before you who have tackled it, right? uh, People in my age group who were born in the 70s and 80s, and when we went to school followed by college and graduation, which I mentioned, uh, you know gender ratio was very low, but it went lower when I went to postgrad. Undergrad was still 20-25%, right?
Hmm.
So while the gender gap is narrow in the VC ecosystem, today we are seeing that in the junior level positions like associates, senior associates, analysts and support functions, the gender ratio is 40%, 35 to 40%, right?
Hmm.
Because the new crop which is now graduating from colleges, in some engineering colleges, there is the women ratio is as high as 30 to 40%. In the year that I graduated from MBA, I think some of the top IIMs in the country actually took their gender ratio to 50%, which was highly progressive of them at that point. You know,
True.
Going from 10 to 50% in a B school was a big leap at that point, right? So now you're starting to see that this change will happen. But the fact that we don't have enough women in top positions in VCs is a concern, and right, and that leads to there is also uh, there is enough research being done that the likelihood of an investor backing a woman-led business is also correlated to the presence of women and gender balance in the investor's own team, right? Within the private equity and venture capital, now we have very low gender ratios, right? And then this does show up in the kind of women startups which get funded, which at the global level is only 3%, and in India it might be at 5-7%, right? So there is definitely a need to look at the whole investing from a gender lens, but I want to also make a caveat here that gender lens investing in its earlier form, when it just came about, right? And
Hmm.
why came about, because people had understood, that women are not getting their due recognition, right? And that was primarily to do because there was a lot of people felt, the traditional investors felt that the market forces and the efficient markets biases should work, and over time capital should move to the best opportunity. But that didn't happen on its own, right? Like you said, there are biases, there are preconceived notions that people have, and hence people became mistrustful of the market's efficiencies and their ability to bring the capital to the right people who might need this capital. So
Right.
hence the need for gender lens investing came up, right? Which initially meant to support, women focused entrepreneurs, but soon the scope has expanded to consider overall number of women in the workforce, like I mentioned, the overall ratio, right? And today, when we look at the gender lens itself, that also focuses on the women in the value chain of the startup, right? As suppliers, as bankers, as consumers. So, are those needs being met? We are looking at products which are meant for women, which are meant not only for women, but also serve a large need for women, right? Women's health, wellness. You have a lot of supplement products which are focused on women's needs, right? Because
Right.
women's needs are much different. Biologically, we are different, right?
Right.
So having a gender lens doesn't solve the issue, because it's important that there be women at the helm of these gender lens focused funds. Only then will that correlation happen. And I'll explain that point further. Why do women need to be there? Is it an affinity? No, it's not the affinity for funding women oriented businesses or women focused businesses. It is the ability of women to network and find other women entrepreneurs.
Hmm.
Otherwise, women entrepreneurs are not very easy to find. They are not, women are very bad at marketing themselves. They're very bad at, blowing their own horn. And
Yeah.
that is what you need in this kind of an industry, right? So, because women owned businesses are very difficult to find, they just don't show up in a search, right?
Mhm.
You need to have your inroads into a network where you can find like minded women who are solving the needs that you want to focus on. And also, women entrepreneurs also feel more comfortable engaging sometimes with women who are in those funds, right? They might feel they're better understood in terms of their challenges, in terms of their constraints. And hence, there is a need for these gender focused or gender lens investors, their teams to be senior investment teams to be led by women, right? And only then can we come out of our ranking of say 70 out of 77 nations on the female entrepreneurship index. That number doesn't look good at all. It makes us look pretty bad. Whereas it's not a deliberate attempt, it's just that women are hard to find.
Women are hard to find. That's very true. You have touched on so many important points here. Um, where do you actually find women other than some women focused groups? And that also, the way they operate and the way they interact and network, it's also a very difficult environment. I mean, we have had on the side very different conversations wherein things like women don't support women has always been questioned,
Hmm.
because
Yeah.
yes, it is already a competitive market. It is already very difficult to bring that limelight. And for some women, this has been a very difficult experience also. Whereas on the other hand, there's
Hmm.
other school of thought that says that yes, women do support women, and that's why we want to flock to that group. Both sides of
Right.
experiences that we have seen. At the same time, when you said that the market dynamics will take their own course, let the best man win. The problem is it's always, I don't know about the best part or not, but the man always end up winning, because what you actually were so apt about, that it's not about favoring women, but it's also about understanding the kind of value that is being brought forward. Maybe the idea for the startup may not really be that mainstream, which is being thought about. It's just so many different aspects that when you look at when you look at a woman sitting across the table, somewhere there's a small voice that tells you at the back of your mind that she will understand, she will get it. And
Yeah.
third part, not being good in finance, not being good in this quick maths or a lot of other, I call this dunyadari, because you need to be street smart if you're actually putting your product across.
Hmm.
Yes, a certain kind of confidence bracket, overconfidence needs to be there, wherein you know you will make it. Even if this
Yeah.
something is at an idea stage, there's a very different conviction that I have seen. which is there in certain founders, which is most of the time missing in women founders, even if their product is ready and it's already doing decent enough. Somehow, the
Yeah.
same confidence with which they should be talking about their product does not come out. So many facets to it, so many factors to it, Mansi, and then you covered all of them. And I was thinking, it's a masterclass in its own, if you have to understand that the problem is, or the solution is not as easy as just putting maybe more women in the investment team, because that also may not really solve the problem, because you have to look at the other side also. So I'll go for the other side now,
Hmm.
wherein, if when and this is for the women founders right now, for them to understand, if there are, and I'm sure you have gone through and you have met so many startup founders, irrespective of the gender here, but key distinctions that you see between a male founder and a female founder, both presenting their ideas, and where you see as an observant that this should not have been presented like this, and maybe this is purely because of the cultural upbringing, societal norms, self doubt, so many aspects to it which contribute to how each gender behaves in our society. What are those distinguishing factors that you would like to tell women founders to stop thinking about?
So yes, it's definitely harder for women to actually, go and even pitch. Like I said, women have been known to not be demanding in terms of their views, right? And that is why you also have this whole gender pay parity issues, right? Because women don't demand. And that is particularly telling in an investment scenario where women don't command the kind of valuation which their male counterparts would.
Mm-hmm.
What I've seen a lot of women founders that I have met, and they do have a kind of backing, right? And that backing comes from having worked at several Indian MNCs, right?
Right.
Which have been at the forefront of the gender diversity issue dialogues, right?
Mm-hmm.
And their Indian counterpart or the Indian offices actually adopting the global uh, company's gender identity actually has created a good ecosystem for both men and women in these MNCs to appreciate gender diversity and why it works. And
Mm-hmm.
that is where I see a lot of women coming out of these corporates, be it the likes of say P&G, Levers, you come out of Morgan Stanley's, Goldman Sachs. I myself came out of Goldman Sachs, right, where gender diversity is encouraged. And this gives them confidence to come to the negotiation table and to pitch for themselves. But people who've not had the privilege of joining these firms, they do tend to second guess themselves. Yes,
Yeah.
also because there are so many naysayers, right, that this will not work. Women are not expected to take crazy risks, right? They're expected by the nature to be more risk averse, and that is something ingrained in your mind, right?
True.
You are not told, oh, go out there and go earn yourself, right?
Mm-hmm.
The
Yeah.
minute you get married or the minute there are life changes, right? You hear a lot of people saying, oh, why are you even working? Right? And those doubts are just placed in your mind, even if you didn't doubt your own existence, right? Even if you didn't doubt your own ability to do certain things. So women have to work harder, definitely. They have to work harder in all spheres of life to make themselves felt, to make themselves heard, and
Mm-hmm.
they have to work harder even say as entrepreneurs, right? Because more often than not the entrepreneur, when they typically start their journey, they might take a small loan, and women you would see often don't even have any property in their name which they can use as collateral. So the whole ability of them to raise money, if you're starting a technology business, you don't have any real assets,
True.
and you are not able to assert yourself either because this is all very new for you, right? So
Hmm.
this tends to be a pretty much of an uphill task. So they require a lot of support. They require a lot of hand holding to understand how to navigate these difficult waters, right? And to not really get bogged down by comments which are not very encouraging or not inspirational. And I think they should just look at role models before them who've come, right? it's human nature to look for role models. Like if you say, that I want to try swimming, right? You look at a successful swimmer. If you want to learn
Yeah.
any trade, you say, okay, this has been done before, right? And
Yeah.
hence it doesn't seem insurmountable. Similarly, women also look for role models, and thankfully we have several of them now in the VC ecosystem. We have many of them in biotechnology firms, in banking. And when we say that, yes, we've seen these women succeed, and you
Mm-hmm.
look at their backgrounds, right? They didn't come from privileged backgrounds at all, right? They're all self-made women. So they should say if they can do it from those backgrounds and back in those days, right, where you didn't have internet, where you didn't have the power of a credit card or a debit card, and you just couldn't reach out to like hundreds of thousands of people.
True.
How am I better off than where they started out from? And hence why my odds of success are much higher than them, right? So they need to look inside. They need to stop second guessing themselves, and they need to disassociate from people who actually make them second guess their own ability, right? Because the reason they have jumped into the fray of entrepreneurship or finance is because something tells them, yes, you can do it, right?
True. No, very, very useful points. And I think that's the second guessing part continues to stay behind. I mean, I have this conversation constantly with my fellow, startup founders, and I see them talking about numbers, and even when the product is not made, they already know what will be the kind of revenues that will be coming out. Whereas I talked to another fellow woman founder, and she's still thinking about, okay, in the first year, this is the minimum I want to achieve. Instead of thinking maximum, you're always thinking this is the minimum that I want to
Right.
achieve. And these may sound like one or two small pointers, but they have huge impact when you're sitting across the table and you're talking about what you
Yes.
actually want to build.
Yes.
So very useful pointers. I hope, and I'm very sure we'll be putting them in structured pointers for women to, take notes from. Um,
Yeah.
my last question to you, Mansi, here is,
Sure.
it's been a long time since you observed, right? You said that, yes, when you entered your college, that's when you noticed something. Then you entered your master's, you noticed something else. Then you entered the
Right.
system, then you noticed that, okay, yes, this problem is actually there. Each one of us are giving it back, or, making sure that what is it that we can do to fix it. Of course, being
Hmm.
in the position where you are, people expect that if somebody thinks that they want to do more for a specific audience, they should just start favoring them more. But when it comes to making investment, that's not how easy the solution is. That, okay, let me just start focusing on women founders only. That's not how it is done, right? And yes, there are dedicated women-led funds who are doing their own, playing their own role. But from where you are, how exactly, and this is also for people, when you said that look for role models, right? You are one role model which
Hmm.
is out there. What exactly are the specific, agendas that you have taken up, that this, if the baton was passed to me at this point, I will make sure that this is where I will be handing it over next to. What are some of the key things that guide you in your role as an individual, as a professional, as a mentor, as a woman in the industry, wherein you are making sure that, okay, I'm going to fix it. So how is that fixing it happening?
Sure, sure. No, so I think there is a definitely a need to fix it, but like you said, it's not going to happen overnight. It's important for us to incorporate a gender diversity within our own organizations. Like if every corporate professional or every startup professional, entrepreneur, or every VC or any investor, be it public or private market investor, were
Mhm.
to understand the need for gender diversity, only then are we going to create strong women. And a lot of women who actually enter entrepreneurship are, a lot of them actually tend to have started working somewhere, right? So to
Mhm.
incorporate women or encourage them to join the workforce, right? It's important to engage very quickly. It's important to engage with, I have always been engaging with my alma mater very
Mhm.
frequently. And if people reach out to me for advice as to what sector they should be joining, what areas of opportunity, you know, I always am there to offer them advice, because I had very good advisors when I was graduating, or when I was stepping out of my engineering school. I think that advice and that right mapping of competence, passion, and the kind of opportunities that we as VC are seeing as to what are the upcoming sectors, right? Rather than saying, oh, I did this, you should follow in my footsteps. That's not the right kind of approach, you know. It's trying to map and seeing, okay, what worked for certain of my friends, what worked for me, what will work going forward, what are the new technology waves that are coming up, to
Mhm.
be able to then advise them on a more individualistic level, rather than give them very generic advice. They can read about it also in books, right? So
Right.
that is something I'm always open to, and encourage women. And I'm part of this wonderful group in Bangalore called Women in Investing, and they have always been very forthcoming in sharing suggestions, and that group has grown, phenomenally over time. And it's a very open dialogue. Everybody can go and reach out to anybody. I think that kind of openness and that kind of approachability is extremely critical to ensuring that people actually can get ahead, right? You're not dependent on a third party. You can actually seek help, because you appreciate and you understand, right? You recognize that something needs to change, right? The other thing I also feel is that all women and men are the flag bearers here, and they can change the whole stream of how things happen. Because when people come out of companies, out of leading MNCs, where they have seen a focus on gender diversity, and they have been made to understand why it's important, right? Why we really need to have it, rather than it being lip service, right? When they go out and create companies, when they go out and are leaders in those companies, we've seen that they also incorporate a lot of this gender diversity within those organizations, right? And the overall acceptance of gender diversity is important for it to really work, right? If there is a company which is not accepting of gender diversity, women who join that organization will not feel safe enough to actually voice their opinion. Then the
True.
whole concept of gender diversity kind of falls away, right? The reason you want to have women in workplaces is so that they can contribute in terms of their unique ideas, thought process, point of views, right? So to be able to create these companies, these workplaces where women feel valued and they feel safe to voice their opinions, is what each one of us coming out of the places and where we benefited as individuals coming out of, right? I don't think if it wasn't for my association, early association, where I interned with Citibank, which I mentioned was very high on diversity, 50% hiring requirement, right, of women. And then for the Goldman Sachs, which is again known to be very high on diversity.
Right.
So they have definitely helped shape a lot of my peer group. They've definitely helped shape my understanding about finance and supported that, right? I've had very great mentors, the best in the industry. And that gives you the confidence to stand on your feet, right? So
Hmm.
I would always tell everybody who tries to look up to me that don't look up to me. You should look inside and find that strength, right? When you fall, you take a hit. You have to find the strength within yourself to get up, because you are the one who's going to carry, and you're the one who's going to cherish the benefit of having overcome everything, right?
True. True.
So I think it's for all of us to stand up and to advise people when they need. So I don't think I'm a role model. I really wouldn't say that. I am somebody who can definitely somebody, if they want to use me as a sounding board in terms of what they're thinking, in terms of their entrepreneurship journey. I'm happy to hear. I'm happy to give them advice. I'm happy to connect them to my network of entrepreneurs, to my network of investors. So always open to new ideas, meeting new people. And I think Bangalore as an ecosystem is a beautiful ecosystem to constantly engage with new people and get new ideas.
No, absolutely. I think everything that you said was music to ears for a lot of people out there, including me. So I wouldn't lie about that. But is it okay if I ask you one last question that
Absolutely,
that's
absolutely.
just been troubling me individually? Now, this is a very very personal question. Um, Mansi, do VCs actually look at the founder composition, and even ponder, because you're part of the system. That's why I'm asking you. As an outsider, it's very easy for us to say that maybe they're not doing it, maybe they're not worried about it. But does this gender imbalance is a concern in the VC ecosystem? Are there conversations happening? Does it bother? If not bother, I mean, is it even a conversation which happens internally, that why we don't have
Right.
diversity?
Yeah. So I can talk about my experience more so in ventures. We're a very early stage investor, right? We typically invest Series C to Series B kind of companies, all
Mm-hmm.
the way perhaps up to Series C as well. And we have invested in over 100 companies in the last 20 odd years of our existence. And given the kind of companies that we've looked at and the kind of early stage where they're at, it's very hard for these companies also to very early in the life cycle attract very high quality talent, right?
Okay.
So typically we don't enforce it upon them, but as they become more mature, what we do force upon them, what we are always looking out for, is for them to have policies which are equitable, right?
Okay.
We look into what their HR policies look like, whether they have posh norms put in place, right, and how they're honored. So
Mm-hmm.
all those things are definitely a consideration. And we don't enforce anything because these companies are also running a very frugal house, right? So they can't very often afford to maybe hire the kind of talent and women. Just to tell you my experience of the kind of women who I know, women are also very choosy in the kind of organizations where they join, and they always want to join the companies which have a very strong ecosystem which exists in terms of women diversity. It's somehow part of a catch 22 for
Right.
companies very early on. Like I said, women are very risk averse typically, right? We
Right.
want also women to break that kind of a mindset. How many women would be told, oh, fine, go and join a seed startup, right? Go and join a Series A startup,
True.
where a large part of the compensation is ESOPs, right? And the mortality rate of these companies is very high, right? So already women are under so much of pressure, and then them taking very high risk kind of a jobs is something which is again something we have to change the mindset of. So it's more of a catch 22. But as part of our own hiring norms at VenturEast, we do look at women candidates when we look to make hiring decisions.
Mm-hmm.
We also pass on resumes of able candidates to our portfolio companies who can also benefit from these kind of diverse views. So it's not something which we focus on very early on, but yes, as the companies mature, that is something that they see within our teams as well, right? Our teams at both senior and junior levels also are represented by women. So they see
Mm-hmm.
that within our teams, and I think that at some point translates into their own hiring decisions as well.
Got it. Got it. No, that's very helpful because, like I said, as an outsider, you don't know what
Yeah.
is happening in the ecosystem. And thank you
So
for limiting it.
the reason we ensure they have the right policies to begin with is so that at some point they can actually attract the right kind of diverse talent. So we set them up for that. We don't enforce it, but we kind of nudge them in our own way.
I think that's the maximum that you can do in your position anyway. Thank you so much, Mansi, for extended time also, not just the time that you had allotted, but also extending it a little bit.
Pleasure.
This was so insightful. I almost feel I can breathe a little more easily because there are a lot of insights that you gave that that are very actionable items, to be very honest, right? And it also takes a very balanced perspective on where the systematic gaps are, and it's not just the buck doesn't stop at VC's front where they can solve the whole gender imbalance problem of the complete ecosystem right now. It's not possible. It may not be done overnight, but there are organizations like yours which are actively working on this, and that's wonderful to hear. Absolutely. From Ungender's perspective, there's nothing more that I can actually hear to close my day in a much better way. So thank you so much for taking up time.
Thank you, Pallavi, for having me here. It was a pleasure chatting with you. Look forward to connecting again. Thank you so
Yes,
much.
any questions that will come our way, we'll definitely pass them on to you. if not now and later on, even when there are, yeah.
Yes, please do. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Stay safe, everyone. Thank you once again, Mansi, and everyone who has been watching it right now and will watch it in future. Take care. Stay safe, everyone.